Hey, it's Drybear. Throne and Liberty is an upcoming MMO that people can't seem to make their minds up about. It's actually been in development for a very long time, starting as an extension of the Lineage IP in 2011 with the title Lineage Eternal. And it actually began as a top-down isometric kind of ARPG MMO and has gone through tons of iterations and changes over the years. But 2023 was a big year for Throne and Liberty. See, about 6 months ago, NCSoft had begun announcing that this year would be the year that Throne and Liberty would release. But it's actually been a bit of a roller coaster ride all year long following the development of it, so today we're going to get caught up on everything that's happened and everything you need to know. If you're an avid MMO player, you're always on the lookout for the next big thing to jump in on, and personally, in my experience, playing MMOs on launch is one of the most fun periods you can be in, because that's when everything's new, no one knows what is meta or is the right way to do anything, and everything's unexplored, and you're grouping with people and there's high player counts, you get to run around and explore the world. So it's fun to keep an eye on games that are on the way that might be really killer, and Throne and Liberty has been on that list for quite a while. It's developed by NCSoft and published by NCSoft, and actually will be published globally by Amazon Game Studios outside of South Korea. Despite all the hype that the trailers generated 6 months ago, a recent poll shows that many of you either aren't looking forward to Throne and Liberty, or maybe many of you just haven't even heard about it. So before we get into the drama that has been going on, let's talk about the game and why it's cool. It is a modern development and it does look great. I think the fantasy art style and art direction fit really well. The graphics are stunning and there's some really nice unique aspects to the game that you don't see as much in other MMOs that make it kind of a wish list worthy game. Now, we covered this when it first was trailered 6 months ago, but I do want to reiterate some of the concerns that I had back then. The game is marketed as purely open world. In fact, most of these environments are sprawling and wide open, and they tout that there's almost no loading zones in any of this. And personally, in my experience, anytime this has been attempted, there's always tons of issues that go along with this. When you have tons of people on screen, you can see the footage that they've shown from their internal testing with thousands of people on screen, tons of effects, animations, models, details, things loading. Most of the time, these situations don't play out well. They're usually quite laggy or quite difficult to process. However, given the background and experience that NCSoft has, developing games like Aeon and Lineage that do have these sort of systems, I think there's enough confidence to believe that they might be able to pull this off. And while they didn't develop games like Guild Wars 2, WildStar, and Blade and Soul, they are the publisher for it, so at least they have some exposure to those systems and how they work. Their intentions for the game are there to be a wide, sprawling choice of activities. You can do these kinds of raids where you invade a city, and the group or guild that takes over the city gets loot, and there's huge siege battle ensues where whoever owns the city gets to defend it, and you can spawn these golems and unique monsters that can be player controlled, that can carry people into the city or get them over the walls or destroy walls to make new entrants for dynamic entry. And then once the city is captured and the loot is plundered, a new golem will spawn that has all the loot in it, and the victor, the winning team, has to then escort that loot back to a home base, which gives any of the other guilds or open world PvP factions an opportunity to ambush them on the road while they're holding this loot to create another opportunity for some really fun battles. On top of that, they are going to give us a bunch of these world bosses, which are arch bosses is what they call them, which are massive battles that take a lot of people to complete. And there's also going to be these open world bosses that are like maybe one rank down below the arch bosses that you kill for loot as well. And tons of these exist in the two areas, the regions that we're going to have initially on launch. But there's not just PvP in the game. They have dungeons that you'll be able to unlock and clear. They've mentioned that many of these dungeons have no load zones, so you'll just have to explore them yourself. There's no level requirement, so anyone can enter and leave, and they have different elevations that you can enter into. So you may get far into the dungeon and then get raided by other players, or you can have a group of PvEers that just want to clear the dungeon as fast as possible. They have these long open world dungeons, and they also have instance dungeons for people that like the traditional PvE challenge based content with a small group. So you can zone into the dungeon and challenge yourself against it to get the better loot out of it. So there's tons of activities for PvE focused players and for PvP focused players that want to get involved in in the game. To help the world feel more alive, they've introduced systems like weather that may change how the world works. If things start raining, you may get a dungeon that gets flooded and you can't access it while that water is there. Or maybe if you get a drought and it dries out, then that dungeon becomes accessible. The weather also affects abilities and spell casting, so during storms, lightning magic might be stronger or modified, and you have different benefits that go along with that. And I think all of these kinds of systems that are built RNG help the world feel more alive and give you more reason to be out in the world exploring. When it comes to traversal, they have a couple new unique aspects that I think make the game kind of fun as long as they work well and feel good. The first one is their mount system, and they kind of took a token from the World of Warcraft druid shapeshifting aspect in that you have 3 different morphs that you can turn into. You have an underwater morph, a flying morph, and a ground morph, and these are effectively your mounts. You can turn into a wolf or a bear or a hawk or an eagle or an otter or something like that, and you can traverse the world around you, and you can do this very instantaneously. So you can jump off a cliff, turn into a bird and fly down, or you can, run down a slope and turn into a cheetah and run across, and all of this is available, which I think makes it feel a lot more interesting. Additionally, which is helpful in combat, there is also a grappling hook that every character will have, which allows you to go up and down elevations just to add to the PvP aspects, but also to give you more dynamic entry on different areas in the PvE encounters as well. Their class system is quite similar to New World, but is different in some pretty important ways. What I mean by this is that there aren't any set classes or archetypes that you'll be fitting into. You will get 2 weapon slots that you can slot your weapons into, and the weapons you put there determine what your character is capable of doing. So you can kind of create your own class. At launch, they're planning to have 7 different weapons in the likes of a great sword, a longbow, crossbows, sword and shield, a wand for support magic, a staff for offensive magic. And how you pick and choose these weapons and how you evolve them is what will determine what your character is capable of doing. But unlike New World, where it is very stat reliant, they've taken that restriction away, at least in the most recent talks, meaning that you can mix and match anything you want without feeling like you have to stack dexterity and use dexterity weapons. You can kind of mix whatever you want. So if you wanted to do bow and magic, if you wanted to do great sword and wand, all of these are possible, and you can kind of create your own class. And the Throne and Liberty team has talked about how they want the combat for PvE to be very dynamic. Maybe you want a lot of mixed bag people that focus on half and half, maybe damage and support or damage and tank, and you put them all together to make the fight better. Or maybe you get ambushed by something and someone can pull out a sword and shield and be an off take suddenly impromptu and start dealing with that, which makes the whole experience a little bit more dynamic. Now, I always worry about these open-handed systems. I think they historically haven't always been as wide appeal as some of the other more strict systems. If you look like Rift, where you can mix and match classes, New World, where you can mix and match the weapons, I think some people just get lost in the sauce and they're not sure how to play their character or what goes well with the other. And so I think there's definitely some downsides to this kind of system, but it is fun and unique, and I think it is kind of something fresh for this style of game. So all in all, the game is exciting and something to look forward to. We were initially going to have the launch be earlier in this year. It got delayed and currently is only releasing in Korea next month in December, and then globally next year at some point in 2024 through the publishing of Amazon Games. Now you're caught up to where we were in the very early stages of 2023 and the excitement for the game. And from this, they had planned some beta tests and some public testing that people jumped onto, and there were problems. Once people finally got their hands on the game, things kind of got murky. First of all, the game felt really rigid. And it was obvious to anyone that was paying attention that this game initially was designed for mobile. It was a mobile-centric, mobile-first game designed to be played on the phone, because when you had more advanced analog systems like keyboard and mouse, things just started to get really awkward. You couldn't attack and move at the same time, because usually on mobile it would be autoplay, or you would take your thumb off the analog stick to press a button, which means you couldn't be doing both at once. And so it felt fine on mobile, but on PC, if you moved at all, you would cancel your melee attacks, some of the abilities would get interrupted, and so everything felt more like meet in the middle and let go of the keyboard and stop doing anything until your abilities are done, or just trade blows like it's some kind kind of old school revolutionary death march. And as you would expect from a mobile first game, there was this system called auto hunting, which essentially meant that you could trigger this, and it's an auto battle while you're logged into the game, which means it would seek out monsters and hunt them, and it would fight and get experience and loot for you. But there's also an offline version of this where you could turn on the auto hunting and log off, and for up to 8 hours, your character would just kill mobs and get loot and get experience while you were sleeping. You can get back on, and then you can just keep going again and again. And the worst part about this is the progression in the game was actually spec'd to include this kind of farming, which meant that the time it took to level up required you to do this kind of auto hunting, which means that the time it took to level up if you weren't auto battling or offline battling was almost impossible to complete. On top of that, since it is a South Korean first game, there were and still are pay-to-win concerns around whether the game is going to be fair enough for the free user to play, or if it's going to require you to shell out large amounts of money on a regular basis in order to stay current and competitive with other players. But we'll circle back to that part in just a moment. So we had all this hype going into early 2023, and by the summer, everyone was kind of freaking out because the game just didn't feel good. If there was going to be a fall 2023 release, or maybe a winter 2023 release, it wasn't ready, and if they launched it in that state, things would not have gone well. But then something happened that honestly doesn't happen as much as it probably should nowadays, and that is the developers listened to the feedback and started making changes. This began with an internal NCSoft earnings call with investors, where obviously if you're an investor in the company, you care about the game's wide appeal and possibilities for success so that your investments can have return. And this call with the investors is available online if you want to listen in, but there were some great pieces of feedback where people came in and started asking very important questions around where the game is going, how to make it feel better, why everyone was disliking it. And the development team on Throne and Liberty just responded and said, okay, bet, we get it. It's not what you want, let's fix it up. And since then, they've been releasing tons of updates on what they've been doing to the game and how they've been improving it for the release that's coming next year. That brings us to their release or hype update video that they did just a couple months ago, going over all of the changes and improvements to the game. First of all, they're doubling down on tab targeting. I think there were plenty of people, especially investors in the earnings call, that hearkened it to the like of things like Black Desert Online or just action combat games that are more freeform. And in this case, they do believe that the tab targeting style is something that is fitting for the game, and they do want to focus the gameplay around strategy and more about thinking through your steps rather than being the fastest or most dexterous with your input. They removed most of the aspects that were very clearly built for mobile, specifically the auto hunting where you could auto battle and auto battle offline. Those features have been removed, and they've also scaled down the progression requirements to no longer include that activity in the process. And in their latest video, they mentioned that the progression requirement, the time it takes in order for you to get from the level 1 all the way to the highest, has been cut down by 90%. So you have 10% of the total value required that it was in the last beta test earlier in the year, and that's because it no longer requires you to be auto battling or offline battling. And much of the combat that we've seen in recent trailers actually looks much better. It doesn't have that kind of stiffness that it had before. They do allow you to attack and move, and that while there are some abilities that require you to stand still, like casting and stuff like that, I think that's normal and par for the course for a game of this style. So now let's circle back to the pay-to-win concerns around the game, as it is a South Korean game and it's very cultural and expected to have that kind of set up for their monetary systems. They have mentioned that there will be battle passes that are primarily going to be cosmetic items. You will be able to get mounts and the pet system, and I don't think they've been completely clear on this, if it's going to be a pet system kind of like Black Desert, which is kind of pay to win. The better pet you have, the better it supports you, the more it gives you, and also the more pets you have, the faster you can loot and things like that. So there are some gameplay benefits to the pet system in that game, and they haven't been perfectly clear on the pets in general, but it's possible those end up being the same. They will have a progression growth system, and We have seen some details in their latest videos going over how this might work. It does sound like it's going to be more fair than systems that you might see in like Lost Ark, for example, or even Black Desert, where when you're trying to level up or evolve your gear, it can break and get destroyed completely, or in Lost Ark, where you can get down to like a 0.5% chance of succeeding your upgrade. They mentioned that these systems won't be the same, that you will be able to progressively improve your gear, and you can even transfer upgrade levels to new pieces of gear, so that if you get a new weapon, you want to change weapons, they want to make sure that the system is free enough that people can move from bow to crossbow over to great sword and then back over to sword and shield if they want, without feeling like they have to invest a bunch of time and money to do so. Which all in all does sound like it's going to be pay to win, with primary efforts being around pay to progress, but not to the same extreme that you might find in some of its competitors. In fact, it sounds like it's going to be a lighter version of maybe Lost Ark combined with Black Desert Online for your progression, and then cosmetics and other pieces like that. Now, obviously, developers need money, and it is a South Korean developer, which means this could be wrong. They could end up being very pay to win and very supportive of that. And it also they could end up adding more systems down the line with new updates that make it even more pay to win. But at least for me, I've had a ton of fun playing Lost Ark and Black Desert Online. I have bought no progression in any of those games around gear or trying to upgrade my character or anything like that. It's all been cosmetics and packs and things like that, and I've had plenty of fun with it. I've never had to spend thousands of dollars trying to get my character stronger and stronger, just because I don't really feel like it's a good use of money in my opinion. And the other thing to think about is that it is going to be published in Europe, South America, North America, Japan by Amazon Games, which means that there might be some changes that get made to the game in order to bring it to those regions. We saw this with Lost Ark, where there were changes to the core gameplay and the requirements and purchase available options inside of the store with the game when it came to the West and to Europe and things like that. And I think that there's definitely grounds for that. So there's definitely some hope that possibly, even if the game ends up being highly pay to win in South Korea, it's very possible that could be limited or reduced when it comes out in other regions. But that's where we're at with Throne and Liberty. It looks really good. There's some fun, interesting aspects to it. My biggest concerns are around just being able to play the game properly without lagging or server correcting all over the place with thousands of people on screen, or just generally the gameplay or the weapons feeling really interesting and designed right so that you are excited to play to make your class and have that kind of system. Because I've seen plenty of these build your own class systems go completely wrong and just feel kind of too loose and too weird, where you don't get excited to play. But let me know what you think. Are you excited about Throne and Liberty? Are you going to be playing it next year? Are you someone who's going to be playing in the Korean version that does come out in just a few weeks? And if so, what draws you to the game? Or if not, if you're someone who doesn't like it, what about the game really irks you? If you found value in today's video, leave a like down below, leave a comment for the algorithm to help this video get seen by more people, and don't forget to check out my other channels for other content and other stuff and other things.